Slow stitching pieces are unique to the user who creates them. They make the choice of thread, fabrics, the size, the depth, the structure. Another way to add originality to each slow stitching piece is to add texture. And I just love textured elements. They can look messy, they can look neat, they can add brightness, depth, softness. In today's video, I'm going to show one technique that I have for adding textured elements to my slow stitching pieces. This is video 1 in an ongoing series of adding textured elements to our slow stitching pieces. Particularly, I like to use the fabrics and the materials that I currently use for those pieces. I might incorporate some beads or charms or something found into those pieces as well, but for the most part, it's just using fabric and threads. So in today's video, I'm going to show you the tag that I make that is really a tool for me. It's a reference tool, and it's the first tag in a series. I'll keep these tags on a ring, and I can refer back to them when I want to add something to my slow stitching piece, but I'm not quite sure what. It's just an inspiration piece, so this is an inspirational tool, and I hope you find it useful. Now here's my process. So on this piece, I have two different types of texture. I have the colored stripes here, which have just a raggedy texture because that's the way I cut them. I like the little threads that are exposed, as well as the stitching. And depending on the colors you choose and the colors for the stitching and the background and the fabric, you get different results. There's also a secondary texture here, and this will be a different video that I show later in the week. But we're going to work on this interesting texture today, and it's very easy to do. I have just a little tag here with a grommet placed in it that I can hold onto my little ring, just so I can refer back to it when I want to add an interesting element to a piece. And this is just going to show this texture here. I just chose two different colors so that I have contrast to really show up. I have just some darker fabric and some lighter fabric. What I'm going to do is cut just a few strips of fabric approximately the same size. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I can trim it down further after that. So I have two here, and I want to get a few more. So I have the size I want. And even though it's just a reference tag, if I have enough material, it can be inspiring in itself, and it can really show me different ideas to incorporate into my work at later times. So the thicker the pieces, the more effect you'll have. Just going to take one of these pieces where I have two pieces of fabric, line it up and just cut it in half again. And I'll do that with all of my little strips here. And I can add more strips if I want to at the end as well, just so that I get that look that I'm going for on my reference tag. So as you can see, my strips aren't perfect, they're a little wonky, but that will be fine, and that itself will add an additional texture. From there, I'm just going to lay out the lineup that I want to do here, and I'm just going to alternate because I think that contrast is nice. I'm going to use all my pieces, so I'll set those aside. And now to start out with, what I do is I take my strip and I'm just going to fold it in half. And I'm just going to finger press it. You can use an iron if you want, but I don't find any need for that. I just want to create that crease, and that will help me be my guide for adding my stitches. I'm going to take it right to my test sample here, and I can either pin it or just hold it in place. And then I'm just going to hold it in place. And I'm going to take some matching thread to my fabric here, and I'm just going to stitch. I can do a running stitch or a straight stitch all the way down. Now I like the look of the raw fabric hanging over the tag, but if you want a smaller piece, or if you want to even tuck it, you can do whatever you'd like to do. And now I'm just going to add some stitches the length of this strip to hold it in place and to really anchor it to my fabric. This is where you get to really personalize it because your stitches are going to peek through. So if you want to do a specific stitch, if you want to alternate stitches, if you want to choose a color of contrasting thread, These are little areas that you can do to really enhance your piece and make this textured element really stand out. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, so my straight line will be somewhat off, but that's okay. If you want it to be perfect, you can even sketch a line with either chalk if it's a dark fabric or colored pencil and just follow that line precisely. Then when I get to the end of that strip, I want to make sure my needle goes through the fabric and comes out the back. I'm going to fold this strip over, again finger pressing it one more time, and then I'm going to take my next color. I'll do the same maneuver where I finger press the fabric to create that crease, and then I'm going to hold it down. Now I could place it really close up against my first piece, and that will give one effect, or I can pull it just a little distance away, or I can pull it quite a bit away. I'm going to pull it about 1/2 inch away from that seam, and I'll make this seam down. And I can either continue with the dark fabric, or I can take some thread of the lighter color that matches that. But I think I'm going to stick with this dark thread because I like the way it'll look and the contrast. And even though this is just a reference tag for me, I still want it to look nice and inspiring. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I can always change any elements to this tag. I can change the color of thread, the length of the stitches, the stitch itself, the fabric. So going into other projects, when I look back at my work, I'll have some ideas. So I continue stitching all the way up this strip of fabric. Again, always ending with my thread going through the fabric, coming out the back. And then I'll just continue adding more of these fabric strips. And I'll do that, and we'll take a look at the tag when I get to that point. So I completed this little sample here. I have everything stitched on the back, and I use just the one color thread. And now I'll just play around with really emphasizing the texture, just by making sure that I didn't stitch things down, that there's room here. I have a couple of strips remaining that I didn't use. And now I can decide what I want to do, if I want to pull up these little threads or trim the edges. So I'll just flip it over and trim the edges ever so slightly. I like a little bit of overhang, but as this is a sample piece, I also want it to just be inspiring enough, and I want to also store it. So there's the completed piece. So by simply folding fabric and stitching it down in quantity, I've added textural elements to this piece. Now you can make lots of variations by the difference in size of each piece, the colors, the spacing, and the depth. And then there's a whole world of adding different stitches to your piece as well as the colors and the size of that. In the future, I'll be adding more videos with different textured elements. Now, when I show you the process that I make, when you do it, feel free to change it up to make it even more unique. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe.